Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wrestling Prep Podcast. We're here with head coach Carolyn Wester, along with our guest today, Tennie McCarty. Tennie's going to be helping out with the coaches clinic and also the very first night of week 2 of camp this summer in the middle of July. I get a chance to talk with some of the wrestlers as well as some of the coaches as an expert in some of the mental and emotional aspects of our sport. I know we spend a lot of time talking about physical preparation and but often we forget, and this is one of the reasons why I like hanging out with Carolyn so much, is because she thinks of all aspects of the sport. And so Carolyn, why don't you maybe give an introduction to Tennie as far as your relationship and how you two know each other, and then you can start off the conversation.
Yeah, well, I can't even begin to tell you how enthusiastic I am to not only have Tennie on this podcast because of her incredible ability to meet the needs of most anyone and help them sort through what's happening in their lives and things they want to overcome, but also because she is going to be coming to the coaches clinic and she is going to be part of week 2 wrestling prep camp. And my relationship with her began when I responded to a posting somebody from Kentucky who I'm quite fond of, not because we're personal friends, but just because of her success. When I was struggling, I was stuck in struggling with some trauma and PTSD and unanswered questions about why I wasn't doing everything I wanted to do. So directed me to this a treatment facility in Buffalo Gap, Texas, called Shades of Hope. And for the second I got off the plane, where there were other people who were also going to Shades of Hope, all they were talking about was how scared they were to be in this session with Tennie. And I was like the opposite. I wanted to be the first person. I wanted to get right there because I was so tired of feeling inadequate at what I was trying to do. And I knew it was beyond my grasp and my capability. And then I got to spend all this time with Tennie and her staff, and it has just made a world of difference for me. And as a coach, we are often inundated with questions from the parents, from other coaches, and from the athletes. Why is my athlete not performing? And of course, I can go through the checklist of all the physical training that's important. Have they done this? Have they done that? But the mental health aspect, I am not qualified. And I am just thrilled that there's someone like Tennie and her systems and her facility and soon to be online assets that can help anyone. So that is how I know her. And I am just exuberant that she's here.
All right.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
You're welcome. So
Still
Tennie,
not gonna halfway live up to that.
oh yeah, you won't have any problem.
Let's see how it goes.
No, that's not even a question. I've been there. I know. So Tennie, I think that is something that we encounter. I remember when I was at Shades, there was an evening session where some local people were in the treatment center. I think it may have been an AA meeting or something along those lines. And one family was talking about their daughter, and what came out of it was that maybe the mom, particularly, and the dad could spend time working on their mental health and their not on purpose role in what was going on. And that's what I want to ask you about. How does a parent or a coach know that it's something in them that's holding their athletes back? How do you know? What do you do?
Well, I think one thing is if the coach or the family, they put too much emphasis on the sport and the achievement and all with the athlete. It is for the athlete. Now, the parents absolutely need to support and be there, but there is a difference between supporting and, trying to take over. And when you have that type of parent, you can almost count that they are carrying baggage from the past. And who doesn't? Most of us do carry unresolved baggage from the past. And the only time you have to address it is when it shows up and creates a problem. For instance, you know, I guess I'm going to brag on my kids a minute. I have four, and they were all athletes, and they were all very good at what they did, but they were all different, and I could not treat them the same. I couldn't. One wanted me there every minute. When she looked up in those stands, she wanted me sitting there. I mean, she didn't even want me to go to the bathroom. She wanted me to sit there. Now, she didn't want me to say anything other than go. And so each one of them were different. And so this is what I'd never played a sport. I didn't know anything about sports. Everything I know about football and basketball and tennis, I've learned from watching my kids and helping them. And what I mean by helping them, that means washing the uniforms, transportation, being the cheerleader and all. And sometimes a quiet cheerleader. But one of the things little stories I tell is, I'm a Cowboys fan. Win, lose, or draw, I'm still a Cowboys fan. So they're down there on the field playing, and the quarterback will go back with the pass, and they'll pass it to the wide receiver, and he's supposed to catch it and run it in for a touchdown. That's their job. The supporters are in the stands cheering them on. I think sometimes the parents get mixed up. And if they're not down there on the field, and I have seen some parents on the sidelines, coaches having to run them off, because they get so involved in their children's sports. And what I make up about that is that they are getting their good feelings through their children. Some of them, we've treated a lot of athletes and a lot of athletes' families. We've treated some, Olympic people and we're not here to talk about all the abuse, but a lot of times athletes are abused beyond, and y'all know that. They are abused. And so for parents, a lot of times they don't intervene when they need to, for fear their kid won't get to play, or for fear they'll be off of the team, and so every child needs an advocate, a healthy parent or someone that is their advocate that will show up at the games and be there in support of them, but not down on the mat trying to play the game with them. So I don't know if I'm even close to answering your question, but sometimes parents try to get their good feelings met through their children, and you can see that. And when that happens and they put so much pressure on the athlete, you can count on it that what I say, if it's hysterical, it's historical. When they get hysterical over something, it's not about that particular match or that particular game. They've gone all the way back to their childhood and picked up those unresolved feelings. And that's what they bring to the court, and that's what their children get to see. And then sometimes parents do need to speak up for their children. And we've seen that where, parents, out of fear that their kid won't get to participate, they won't say anything. And a lot of it is about no harm. And if there's any harm done to a child, we need to teach our children that parents are safe. Go to parents. But now those parents have got to be safe, because sometimes they will let things slide, particularly if they have a star. I don't know if y'all have experienced any of that.
Yes, ma'am,
Oh, yeah.
for sure. You have
Can
something
you
you want to say,
think?
Bryce?
I was thinking too. I like the idea that every athlete needs an advocate, but I wonder if you have any experiences, either personal or from your past. It sounds like you've been around a lot of sports with your kids, where it's hard for me. I'm a parent too. Neither of my kids wrestle, but they play sports, and so I'm wondering where would you draw the line as far as there's a point where a parent becomes an advocate for their kid, but there's also a point where the parent, as you said, is now not just advocating for them, but also putting a lot of pressure on them to perform and going to coaches with playing time concerns and that sort of thing, which is probably more than advocating for the kid. They're advocating for themselves because they're gleaning their own self-worth off of the success of their kid. Is there how does one determine the line between being an advocate and not ignoring situations that might need attention while not stepping over the line?
Well, one thing, a parent may have a very talented kid, and they know they're talented. The kid knows they have the talent. Everybody knows they have a talent, but they get into practice and they don't perform. They don't follow direction sometimes because they have been fed how good they are, and that is, building a kid up. That's that false sense of security. And so it's, I'm very much against, and I've seen it through the years, people go, and I'm not bragging on my kids, but my kids would be some of those that would get to play all the time. But I'll tell you, they worked hard. They took the sport serious. I would always tell them, if you're going to go out for something, you can quit, but not in the middle of it. You're going to finish that year or that half year or whatever, it didn't make any difference to us whether they did it or not. But if you're going to start something, you're going to finish it. So that support at home, I think, is very, very important. And I think it's embarrassing to kids for parents to go and intervene. Sometimes you want to, and you'll find out things. And I'll say this, in schools, in particularly small schools, I think politics can enter the picture in that, you've got coaches will have school board kids on there. You following me?
Yes, for sure.
And that athlete's not as good as some of the rest, but those school board members are the ones who vote that, that hire them, and they have the ability to fire them, so it brings in a lot of for everyone that it's difficult. And if people can separate and let it be a kid sport or a young people's sport. And I was talking to someone earlier about, I have a grandson. I knew I'd figure out how to talk about Spencer, but
yeah, well, we like Spencer.
He was a good athlete, and he played on the line in football, and he got a full ride to college. Now, a young man that played right along beside of him, and they're good friends and all, and they were both talented, but the other kid didn't get to play very much. He had some real physical problems, and he would miss a lot of school. He'd miss a lot of practices, but then his folks would throw hysterical fits because he didn't get to play. And that puts a black mark on kids. And that young man now is a coach. And I was talking to him at my grandson's wedding. I said, why don't you go into coaching? And he said, so I could work with kids like me that have physical problems and that their mother's not back there with a handprint, pushing them. So, we all go into our professions for different reasons. But it's, let's say I'm 82 and I forgot what the question is, so bring me back.
You're talking about what we want to say to people. Like a lot of people ask me, probably ask Bryce, why, when a parent feels like a kid isn't performing, and I want to say to them, what's going on at home?
Yes.
How are you interacting with them? Does when the kid says things to me like, my parents are putting all their money into this and my little sister isn't getting this, or something's going on, or my brother's being, difficult and says he hates that I wrestle, or whatever it is. And coaches you know, I just don't know many coaches that are super self-aware. And I'm interested in what you think are the signs, if you're a coach or a parent, that maybe you ought to take some time and figure out what's going on with you.
Yeah, and it is communication, and it's in, I've seen every type of coach you can imagine. I mean, y'all have too. And there's bullies, and that are coaches, and usually they're the ones that wasn't the star players, that you've heard this before. If you can't play it, coach it, And so and so they go in, and I've seen this with coaches. They go in with a chip on their shoulder, and then they take that out on the kids, and, I mean, good or bad, whatever. Coaches are kept because they have winners, and you have to have a winning team. I mean, you can, have a down year or two, but after a while, you're gone. So they want to win. That is what coaches want to do. Now, I've got a dear, dear friend that was one of the first women athletes in the United States, up in Seattle. And she talks about how she worked with her coaches, and she's still friends with me. I mean, she's an older woman, I don't know, older women. But anyway, the things that she did, she coached her coaches, is what she did. And, helped them. And she was doing a lot of what we do, but she didn't know that's what she was doing. But it's so important. If something shows up in our behavior and we take things out on kids or whatever, there is something going on the inside, on the history. And that's where parents and coaches together need to have the opportunity to do some of their own work. Do your own work, because you're only going to pass on to your children as much health as you have. If you don't pass on the health, you're going to pass on the sickness. We can't do it any different.
It's so interesting you say that, especially the part about your peer coaching her coaches. And I think what I see that as is when I'm working with someone, I find that most athletes that are getting right on the edge of being successful are very uncomfortable with confrontation. They don't want to share what they're really thinking, and it's not been a positive experience for them. I consider that coaching your coach, telling your coach how you feel about what you're doing, and being able to have a conversation. And in wrestling, the normal response is it's my way or the highway, or I know and you don't know. And I just think that's a giant red flag that you can have a confrontational conversation and you can let the athlete tell you how they feel, and you can involve their parents if that's where it's supposed to be. And then you can talk about it and come to an agreement. Now, the coach could choose not to be the coach anymore if they don't like the agreement, but not taking it serious and talking to the athlete and letting them express how they're feeling is, I think, a sign. And also these coaches who separate the kids from their parents, where they say to the parents, this is just between me and your athlete. And I think that is incorrect. I think, especially in wrestling, where you go to lots of variegated groups, tending to get training, that somebody has to be sort of the coordinator. And over the years, people will say to me, why are so many of your athletes still friendly with you? And I'm like, well, first I was their coach, then they transitioned to college, and now we're both adults. But because I've let them say what they wanted to say to me, and looked internally and sat with it and processed it, and then tried to meet their need while still achieving their goals, I think that's what makes it possible. And I think a lot of coaches don't want to do that work. They want to do what they want to do, which is usually nothing vulnerable. And then they want the athlete to toe the line, so they can avoid having to be vulnerable with themselves and coaching themselves on how to be a better coach. I may be rambling, but I hope you get what I'm saying.
Well, what you're saying is boundaries, 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 boundaries. Because if people can set boundaries, and I don't think they teach it in school, I don't know if they do or they don't, but in order to be able to have a say for yourself and to be your own advocate or to be an advocate for your children, you have to have some healthy self-esteem on board. Not a bully, but some healthy self-esteem on board. And then, when you go to a coach or the athlete goes to the coach, it's all about knowing where we stop and someone else starts. It's about boundaries, and it's a lot of boundary failure with coaches. They don't know how to interact. They probably were not taught in their childhood how to, and it wasn't okay to have a voice, So that's why we're really big on helping people go back. You don't want to go back and live in the abuse or whatever, the dysfunction, but you must go back and visit it and see, and do the work around it, do the anger work or the shame, whatever is back there, do that work and leave the past in the past. Otherwise, you're going to bring it in, or people will bring it into any relationship. And particularly, you get a mother that has just, and it could be a dad, either one, that was abused anyway as a child. And they made a decision, no one was going to abuse them again. And so they look at everyone like, they're a prospect of abusing them. So you must go back, I believe, and look at your history and do the work around it. And then at some point, people need to grow themselves up and say, yeah, that shouldn't have happened to a kid, let alone, or an adult, let alone a kid. So what? Now what? And then bring yourself up and grow up. I have seen parents act like idiots at games and coaches. And then you get them together. It's quite a show, and I mean, and that's what they're teaching the athletes. That's what it's, you can talk till hell freezes over, but what they're going to really learn is how they act, what they see, the behavior with the parents and the coaches. Do y'all believe that?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking too that dynamic between coach and athlete can be really difficult because as a coach, I feel like one of the things I'm trying to do with my athletes is to push them to be uncomfortable and get them to places that they're not necessarily happy being all the time. That's in the interest of them achieving goals that we may have worked on together. And then it should be okay for that athlete to push back on that a little bit, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do that, both as a coach and an athlete. There's a way for me to talk about my expectations and to encourage them to do things in practice they might not be excited about doing. And then there's a right and a wrong way for the athlete to then push back a little bit and decide that they're and express the fact that they're uncomfortable, which in many cases they should be, but doing it in a way that they're starting a conversation rather than just shutting down or not doing what we agreed was best for them and things like that. It's,
Yeah. See, there is nothing any better for a classroom. I mean, for young people to learn, and that is from little league or t-ball all the way through college. There is no classroom any better than sports. I think kids are going to learn more from sports. And they do need to know how to write a letter and all that stuff, but sports is going to teach them how to live out in the real world. If they have got, because they're going to get out there and they're not going to always get their way. And they're going to be told things about bosses. And I mean, they may have some brilliant ideas, but a boss does not care. This is how we've done it forever. This is how we're going to do it. And, it's It's this way or the highway, So you're preparing those kids to, you don't have to be fragile with them. Just don't be abusive. There's a fine line, I think.
Yeah, I see parents wearing all the time that says winners win, shirts that say something like winners win. And I see them and they're yelling and screaming and yelling at the ref and displaying behavior. And I just think, what is it you're trying to get from this kid? And coaches also. You can't be a coach if your self-image is based on how your athletes do. You have to be, I believe you have to be grounded elsewhere so you can be open to all these dynamics that are going on. You as a coach have a right to say, oh, I'm just in complete disagreement with this family and their processes. And I don't have to be their coach and they don't have to come to me. And there's nothing wrong with that. You have to find that balance. But I think coaches, especially in wrestling, especially ones that are a little bit older, don't feel there's some stigma still with doing the work. And I just think just even feeling that stigma should be a sign that what's going on with me. Yes, ma'am. I have one family and I felt that the son who I've coached for since 2018, might benefit from speaking to someone about how he was feeling outside of the family. And the parental response was, well, what are they going to say about me? What is the therapist going to think about me? And of course, you want to say, come on, are you crazy? This is about your kid. But in actuality, they're probably a damaged kid too. And that's what I'm hearing and trying to guide them that they would benefit from it too. Not go and ask, how can I help my kid, but how can I help me? Is that right?
It can be a generational curse. And then if you've got a parent that has some low self-esteem, or maybe they wasn't a good athlete and they happen to have a kid that's a good athlete, oh my God, I mean, they make that kid so much more than what they are. They're kids at the end of the day. And so they put them up on that pedestal, and guess what? They're going to fall off. And when they do, then the parents take it to heart. And I mean, I have seen them storm through gymnasiums, go all the way back to where where they're meeting, slam doors, go back there and get the coach. I mean, and what that does, that embarrasses the kid. And so it's a generational curse. It's passed, and kids carry the parents' feelings. It's almost like they just pick it up, put it on their back, and go through life. And unless we do something to get rid of the baggage. Now, I'm sure there are some healthy families out there. The business that I'm in, I just don't happen to see. I see them get healthy through, work, but they don't come to me they would never come to see me. They never think about having to, but I see people and it is generations. It's just passed on from one generation to the next. But the good news, it can stop in one generation. One generation, it can stop, and but I still think that sports is one of the best ways that kids can learn self-esteem. And, back to my grandson, Spencer, he was a good athlete. He wasn't, he pretty much, he excelled in football, got a full ride to play ball. And then he hurt his back between his freshman and his sophomore year. They honored his scholarship. And I want to just throw bouquets at his parents because that kid had something on the inside. A lot of kids would have just dropped the sport altogether, but he stayed on the team. He washed uniforms, he did videos, he did everything he could to support and help. He couldn't even help coach on kind of his back, other than, I mean, he couldn't get out. And so anyway, I'm saying that if that is instilled at home, it's going to show up on the field, it's going to show up on the mat, they're going to carry those, but it's those characteristics, but it's not too late. It's never too late to change. Yeah, and I've seen some of the best athletes throw their chances away. And of course, we're in the business of addictions. I've seen them throw it away for drugs and alcohol over and over and over, and sometimes they're the best athletes that you'll have. And so that's a whole different subject, I guess, for a different
Well,
time.
I do want to say that we see a lot of athletes in wrestling become addicted to eating, especially because of the weight cutting, Tenny. They don't weight cut correctly, and not because they haven't been taught most of the times, or it's expensive for their parents to have two menus. Some families will say to me, well, we don't eat that the adults and the other kids, so we have to spend more money for them to eat. But that could be the problem from the beginning, right? Like if you don't eat well, then your child doesn't eat well, and there's a history of not eating well, and it's so prevalent when they consider food to be a treat. This is a treat. I made weight, so now I can eat waffles and whatever, as opposed to I made competition weight, I'm going to have some broccoli and a piece of chicken and something else. So we see that a lot in wrestling, and then I think a lot of it is that parents don't go, gee whiz, my athlete, my girl, my son or my daughter is eating healthily to make competition weight, and I don't want to eat any of this. I want, KFC and Haagen-Dazs or whatever, and they don't go, whoa, maybe this is me. Maybe my kid supposed to eat well because I'm that way also, because people use eating, you're the expert, but I think people use eating for comfort.
Oh, absolutely. For a compulsive overeater, food does for a compulsive overeater what alcohol does to an alcoholic. It eases the pain. It pushes that pain down. Now, the combination that we see with wrestlers is, they eat and they'll eat good, or for a short period of time, kind of like you said, the protein. I mean, they'll have it all figured out, and they'll reach that, be right up there. You don't want them to go over, you want them to be just a certain weight. And what they'll do is, and that's when they come to us, it'll turn into bulimia. I don't know if y'all see much bulimia now this is what's been reported to us, that some coaches will have buckets there by the scales for them to throw up in order to lose 5 ounces or whatever, just to make that goal weight. Now, if they have a family history of any kind of addiction, when they start using food or they start using bulimia, it fires that brain, the pleasure part of the brain, and it feels good. And if, before you know it, you've got an eating disorder person on your hand. And so that's what I've seen a lot with wrestling. And then so many of them will go the other way and lose too much weight, and then they like that. And I've seen them, they'll bring in pictures of how their kid looked at a normal weight, and they'll be their weight will be very compromised. They'll get into anorexia. So it all needs to be talked about, and it is important that they do meet that certain goal weight. But if the parents could feed the kids and the family like that all the time, let it be, like what they do, and not just something to get ready for a match.
Correct. I agree with you. We see in the last 10 years, many states and state high school and collegiate federations have required, a certain amount, you can only lose a certain amount of weight in a certain amount of time, and they have to be hydrated when their lowest weight assessment is made and things of that nature. But we still see abuse diuretics, laxatives. And, a lot of athletes will make weight, then go out and get an IV. But these kids who aren't drinking, aren't eating for days at a time, they can't perform in school. Their ability to care for themselves is limited. And some of these athletes spend, once the high school competition and collegiate competition season starts, 90% of their practices are weight cutting practices. They're not practicing technique. They're not practicing strategy. They've got 3 layers of clothes on, a hat, and they're running around, trying to lose a certain amount of weight. They're not water loading. They're not doing anything that can make it relatively simple and healthy. And is that like when parents or coaches or even athletes feel that way? Is that a control? Are they trying to?
It's control, and it's a form of abuse. Absolutely, it's a form of abuse. And we call it the big C. It's about control, 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 control. And I just make this up. I don't know, but they probably don't do that to the less talented. Is that
Right.
true?
Oh, that's true.
Say it
You
again.
find a talented kid, and you're gonna, I mean, not y'all, but you, because I've heard coaches say, and I have a daughter that, well, I have 3, but I have one daughter that 2 of my daughters, the coaches would brag on them. They're so coachable. They're so coachable. And they did get. Now, I had one that had a lot of natural talent, but she didn't like to be coached. She wanted to coach herself. And that does not work, because she thought she knew more than they did. Anyway, she fooled around and lost a full ride to go to college because she thought she knew more than any coach ever thought. So you got to work with each kid different. They're different, And then mine were so close to age, they were compared to each other, because I had a senior and a junior and a freshman. And the freshman was really, anyway, I won't get into all my kids, but I've been there with, with athletes and with my, like I said, with my own kids. And the ones sometimes that are the most talented, throw it away. Do y'all see that much?
Yes. Oh, for sure. We've seen that. And I want to go back to something you just said in there, is that a lot of parents will come to me and say, high school coach is demanding junior, is a 108 pounder this year, but he's been walking around at 130. And I said, well, tell them no. And they're like, well, we can't do that. I said, of course you can. You can go to the athletic director, you can go to the principal. Oh, we don't want to make a stink. So I said, your kid struggles to make weight? Yes. They walk around at 133. Yes. They want him to go 108. Yes.
Want them to go.
Why are you afraid of advocating for your kid? Why can't your kid get good at the weight they are? What advantage is it when they're starving and they have no water? What advantage is that? The very first great nationally recognized athlete I was associated with, he never cut weight. His idea of cutting weight was 2 bowls of ice cream instead of 3. And he won everything across the country and in college also. And he learned to wrestle at his weight. But these parents and coaches believe that being in detriment, being below par in weight and in energy and feeding your mitochondria and every cell of your body gives them an advantage. And I think that says to a kid, I don't think you're very good.
What they're doing is creating someone with an eating disorder too.
Correct.
I mean,
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's definitely the case when you're telling kids to cut weight. You're basically telling them that I don't think you're good enough to win at your natural weight, so you need to suffer to get to a lower weight, and then you might be good enough to win at that weight. And rather than coach them towards success where they normally would be, you're telling them that they're not good enough at their natural weight. Let's make you lighter so that you have a chance, which it seems backwards, but yeah, that's definitely the case.
Well, I know there's a conundrum when you have a team and you need to fill
Right,
all your
right.
weight classes. And wouldn't it be great if every, if there was a person for every weight naturally. And I know there isn't, but to me, either feed them more and have them get physically stronger and go up, or something, but telling them that they're not good enough as they are is,
Self-defeating.
yeah, it's a problem. I mean, not for somebody who's clearly, they're when they're assessed, the weight that they're can assess to is a reasonable weight, and it's, a lot of pounds, but they're also, their body fat is high enough that making the weight is not compromising them.
Y'all had many problems with kids on steroids?
We have a lot of, parents that are on steroids, and that is a problem.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rage in wrestling, and it's hard because there are a lot of kids who are very successful in wrestling whose parents rage, the dads rage at the edge of the mat and are yanking their kid, like grown kids, 17, 16, 18. Gratefully, right now in US wrestling, with the ascent of the Bassett family of Bo and Keegan and Melvin Miller, who they've adopted, Mr. Bassett, Coach Bassett, is not that way. And you see his athletes at a very healthy weight. He's not a rager. He doesn't get upset. He is the high school coach, but he doesn't get upset on the side of the mat, and is very encouraging. And I've never seen him lose his cool. But we don't have so much athletes on steroids as I think we just have athletes who are smoking weed and maybe doing other things. I'm just not current on all the drugs and what's current in high school, but I'm always surprised by the athletes who I find out over time are smoking weed, do have access to it, and some of them are taking Adderall and other things, which I can't help but think would affect them.
So are they tested for it?
No,
Not
not in
the
high
high school kids. No.
colleges, but I don't know what all they're tested for.
Yeah.
And then if they want to become a fighter, Tenny, in the UFC, marijuana and some other recreational drugs are accepted.
Acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if injury related and recovery. So many states, so many people use weed, but I think it's just like eating. When my mother was dying, we certainly used marijuana to try to get her to eat, but I think it's the same as overeating or over drinking or over, if you're using it in excess and not for reason and not under supervision when you're of a certain age, then the abuse is going to occur, I suspect.
And, it can be a beneficial drug, used, like you said, used the right way. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know if y'all had much of that or not. Yeah.
No,
It
I think
seems like, oh, yeah, go ahead, Carolyn. I had something.
No, I was going to say, I
something
think the
else.
biggest epidemic we see is abuse of food and people who haven't dealt with their trauma. And wrestling is a sport where over the years we have less coaches and less referees. And it's so sad, Tenny, because this sport has no pre-genetic disposition. There's no gender bias, as you know, with your granddaughter-in-law, and who is a great wrestler. And it's just a terrific sport, but coaches burn out so quickly, and not just from the hoops you have to go through with the schools and insurance and all the way parents are and being careful, and it's just a different world, but also because they are not being encouraged to deal with or provided services for their own trauma. And that's where I think getting what you all are doing at Shades, what you're going to be providing online, and what people can do in privacy is so key for growing wrestling, in my opinion.
We're really excited about the online program because people can move at their own pace. They can do it in private. They can, and then if they need, it'll all be laid out for them, word for word. And then if they need more assistance, then they can pay extra and get, a therapist. They can get me, they can get one of the others, on board. And then ultimately, if after they do the online program, they may see the need to do some internal work, and that's where the intensives will come in. We have been in inpatient treatment I've worked in the field for 45 years, but at Shades, we've been doing this for 38 years. And I started doing intensives when I started the program. And we've kept up with the statistics. And now there are some who need long-term treatment, and they're the severe ones. But most people can benefit, like you did, from an intensive, follow directions, go home. And so that's why we're excited about the online, if then, do the online. It's affordable. It is in the privacy of your own home. You're gonna have lots of backup and support. And then if there's a need to do an intensive, they'll be available. And then, we do family weeks, we do coupleships. And so anyway, there's
it's such a great thing. And so many people, we see, Bryce and I see in our sport, people like, oh, we got to get ready for the next tournament. And if a child loses a match at one tournament, they're like, they direct all the training is for the next tournament to win that one. And then win this one, but wrestling is a long-term sport, the maturation. So, like 60, 70% should always be toward becoming a better wrestler, and the 40 to 30%, or maybe even 20, tweaking areas of need that pop up in competition. But they don't treat mental health the same way. And they think stopping and taking 6 days, 5 days for an intensive or 20 minutes a day to do a course is going to keep them from that win. And they don't see, in my opinion, that what they're doing is actually taking away from the opportunity to have a long-term win in athletics as a human, as a parent, as a partner, whatever it is, it gets taken from you. And I really feel, especially in this sport and MMA and jiu-jitsu and all the sports that I'm involved in, that this is very important. And if people can unplug for, I don't even know how many days I was there, 5 or 6, it was the most best return on investment of 6 days of my life I've ever experienced in anything I've done, education, sports, my parents' political career, anything, Tennie. Those days there, that investment and plugging in and doing exactly what I was asked to do was the best return on investment for every aspect of my life.
Oh, thank you. That's
Well, you're welcome.
Wonderful compliment. Wonderful. And what you did the work. So you did the work, and you followed up, and you continued to do it, and that makes the difference. It's life changing. It can be life changing for people. And if that, if there's any trauma at all, it is going to show up more in sports than just about any area of life. It will show up because of the competition and that need to compete and to excel and be better than. And so trauma plays a big role. And a day in the life of a child is much different than a day in a life of an adult. And particularly if you have a sensitive child, what is said and done to a child goes to that child's heart, and it stays in there, and it's like they build and build and build on it, and then they show up in sports, and sometimes will either blow up or they'll hold it all on the inside and break down, and stress-related illnesses, unresolved trauma and unresolved feelings can be a detriment to anybody. And and then when it's passed on from generation to generation, children carry the parents' pain. We don't plan for them to do that. We don't intentionally do that. But if we don't look at our own and pass it back where it came from, we will pass it forward to our children. We can't do it any other way. We can't.
Yeah, you're wonderful.
Well, you are too.
Yeah, it seems
We
like
like each other, right?
I was just thinking through a lot of this too. It seems like the common thread through much of this, whether we talk about weight on the scale or results in the match, is this unhealthy obsession with results over the process, and going back to some of that growth mindset stuff that it's important when we praise our athletes that we're praising their effort and not necessarily the outcome. And but what I'm taking away here too is that it's easy to talk about that, but it's probably as important to do a little bit of work on your if you find yourself in a situation where you do have this unhealthy obsession with results, is to take a step back and think about why that might be. Yes, focus on the process and focus on sort of growth in that way. But it's also important to take a step back and start asking questions as to why is it that I'm obsessed with the results of either myself as an athlete or my athlete as a coach or my kid as what is it about my past and the way that I process the world around me that makes that so important to me rather than seeing them grow or watching them put in effort towards a goal and things like that. So it's really cool. That's one thing I'm definitely taking away from this is not only to focus on the process, but to start asking questions as to why do I process the world this way? And it sounds like you have a ton of experience helping people through those things, which is great.
Oh, thank you. And that mental obsession that you talk about is an idea that overcomes all other ideas. And when you get honed in on that obsession, it's like you can't do anything but focus on the obsession, whether it's wrestling or, exceeding, whatever the obsession is, drugs, alcohol, food. And I agree with y'all that food is a big problem, probably a bigger problem in wrestling than any other sport. Do y'all find that to be true?
Oh, for sure.
It's just
I
something
think
you have to think
probably,
about all the time. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
You can
besides
go to
something like
practice and leave
ballet and
practice,
things.
but you can't ever stop eating. Yeah, it's just something that's always on your mind. I could see that. Yeah.
Doing mandatory weigh-ins at every practice and, you're walking down the hall in school and the wrestling coach walks by, or you're in your English class and your coach is your teacher and they say, hey, Junior, you were 6 pounds over and you came in 8 pounds over this morning. What's going on? In front of everybody, everybody, that's around you. And I think
Abuse.
it's abuse.
It's a
And
form of abuse.
for sure. And I even want to say back to what Bryce was saying, and is that what Bryce is saying, when you see or ask yourself why these things are happening, is that it is like some of us have friends that are alcoholics, and the friend will say, hey, we think you're over drinking and you've had a DUI, and they'll say, yeah, I'm aware of it. I'm gonna cut back. And in our hearts, we know they need help. You've got to know yourself when you look at yourself and go, why am I obsessed? You need help too. You can do online help, like we're discussing at Shades of Hope. There's lots of other places that you can get information from, but it is not just because it doesn't involve a judge and a wrecked car, it is still need help and a system and a way to work through it and people you can talk to without hurting their feelings and say what you think and have them help you control that behavior or morph the behavior. I'm sure I'm not using the right clinical terms, but is that correct, Tennie?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you have to bring in professional interventionists, but sometimes it can be the most loving thing a person can say and, and do it in form of a confrontation. When I see you drinking or overeating, what I think about this is that you're off your program. And what I feel is a lot of pain, just do a confrontation. And that's what I hope to, one of the things I'd like to teach in July is and have them practice doing the confrontations and let them get the laughter out and the embarrassment out and all shucks and all that, that's a real clean cut tool. But everybody has to be taught how to do it. And really, about the only thing, once everyone learns the process, about all you have to say is when you, because then a lot of times you don't have to go through the whole confrontation, but it gives people a voice, and it's in a civil tone of voice, and then it's just about talking about your own perspective and your own feelings, and it's an educational tool that we taught it to our grandkids, and, to have a 3 or 4-year-old put their hand on their hip and say, Minnie, when you blah, 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 and they tell you what your shortcoming is, that it's a healthy way to be able to express your feelings without being reprimanded, and it's done in a healthy way. So if, with your permission, I'd really like to.
Oh, we can't wait.
And then, they'll all kind of take it humorous, but let them practice. And but it is a good tool. It's a really good tool that in teenagers, as much as they get embarrassed, it is something, gives them a frame of reference of how to say, and if everybody's on board, everyone can do it,
It'll be great.
And
I'm so enthusiastic about it.
Well, I
Yeah,
am
that sounds
too.
great.
It's
Looking forward
all
to meeting
about.
you in person in July. That should be awesome.
Yeah, I'll be there.
All
Bryce will
right.
be out from Arizona.
Yeah,
So
I'll definitely
Good
they'll
for
be there.
you. Good for you. Well, I look forward to meeting you face to face, and
Yeah.
I'm excited. Yeah, it'll be good.
For
All
sure.
right.
Yeah.
Anything else,
So,
Carolyn or Tenny, that we missed out on that we want to, or we'll keep everybody waiting until July for
Do you
the
have,
coaches
do you know the URL for the online? Has it been launched, Tenny, or is it
it's going to
still
be May 15th.
May 15th?
May
All right.
15th.
And they can just go to shadesofhope.com and be directed to it?
Yes, yeah, and it's
All right.
we're real excited. It's going to be different tracks, like for specific, like there'll be one for teenagers, there'll be one for teenagers with sports, but then there'll also be, codependency and alcoholism, eating disorders in athletes. That is something that needs to be looked at. Look at the, we've treated, because we have 3 universities here, so we have treated a lot of track stars. We've treated, tennis players, you name it, and and they have to keep that weight in check. And sometimes they do very unhealthy things. A lot of times after treatment, they can't go back to the sport, because they have compromised their bodies so much. And that's when, if we could encourage people, when there's a problem, deal with it head on before it gets to be a detriment, And I can get some, I can get some feelings going just hearing you say that coach says, you've gained 6 pounds or 8 pounds. Oh my Lord, that is not what to do inside a classroom.
For
Now
sure.
that kid may not be sensitive, but he may be. He may be. So we're going to talk about boundaries. I'm going to teach them a lot about boundaries. And I can do it in a way that I think could be fun and hopefully healthy
It'll be great.
and helpful.
All right. Yeah, I'll
For
definitely
sure.
put a link to your main site in the show notes, and also we'll put a link to the coaches clinic as well. So anyone out there who wants to meet Tenny in person and go through some of these exercises and for either for
And then the
yourself or for your
athletes that are
athletes or
coming to
both. Yeah.
week 2.
Right.
Week 2
right.
will be, we'll get her too on the
I'm
first
excited.
first
I'm
evening. First
All right.
evening is all
forward
Tenny
to it.
after
All
they
right.
eat.
Well,
Looking
yeah.
forward
Thanks
to
for the
it.
conversation. Definitely gave me a lot to think about, and we'll see you soon. All
All
right.
righty. Thanks. Nice
Bye.
meeting you, Bryce. Good to see you, Carolyn, as always. And
Yes,
looking
ma'am.
forward to July, but we'll probably talk before then.
I suspect so. I hope
All
so.
right.
Thank you so much for
Bye.
the invite. I've enjoyed it.